right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Joe, he's Nick, and you're listening to The Nick and Joe Show on ThinkRadio.ca or on your favorite podcast network. And, you know, Nick, we don't talk about it enough, but The Nick and Joe Show is pretty much on all of the mainstream podcast networks out there. They have not banned us yet. So you can catch us on iHeartRadio, on Apple Podcasts, on Google Podcasts, on Spotify, on et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
You name it, we're there.
You name it, we are there. So, you know, you don't have to listen to us live, and you don't even have to, you can just catch us, as I said, on your favorite podcast network. Anyway, so welcome back if you've been listening to the live show. If you're listening to the podcast, well, welcome back again. We have been talking about, we touched on in the last segment, and you know, if you're listening to the podcast, you can go back and listen to previous podcasts. But Nick, we touched on in the last segment the whole idea of ministerial responsibility, and the whole idea that in Ontario, when the justification for them coming up with even more restrictions for the general population, now a stay-at-home order that is coming into effect, that, or by the time you're listening to this on the podcast, has already been in effect for a few days. And they're basing this on the fact that the modeling that they were using almost virtually throughout 2020 turns out that it was wrong. I don't know what that means. I don't know how they made mistakes. I don't know what the flaws were in the program or whatever that they were using. But it was wrong, and now what they're saying is that the situation is actually much worse than we were led to believe by this computer model that we were using. And that, to me, is a pretty big, egregious error. It's led to a stay-at-home order in Canada's most populous province. The engine that drives Canada's economy is located here in Ontario. Canada's biggest cities biggest city is in Ontario. The national capital is in Ontario. This is not small potatoes. And yet, I have not heard one peep about accountability for this mistake. I haven't heard one peep about the minister taking responsibility for what amounts to an historic record, an historic mistake by officials in her department. I don't know if there's any accountability in the department, but certainly, you know, in when I was younger and first getting involved in the political field and in electoral politics, Nick, and it's, you know, it's not that long ago. We were talking 30 years, 35 years maybe. Ministers resigned for this kind of thing, even if they didn't personally they weren't personally responsible. They didn't do anything personally wrong, but there was a tradition in parliamentary democracy in the Westminster system where ministers take responsibility for the mistakes and the problems in their departments. It's called ministerial responsibility. But nobody does this anymore. And this leads to the bigger question about the vacuum in real leadership that we have today in our society, Nick.
You're absolutely right. Now, yesterday, I listened to, if the listeners are familiar with that movie, The Darkest Hour, about Winston Churchill becoming prime minister. I can't remember what side of the Blitz it was on, probably going into it.
Correct, going into it, you're right.
Message.
Well, yeah. It was before, it was even before the Blitz.
That's what I mean, going into the Blitz.
Right.
Well, so in other words, the Blitz hadn't happened yet.
Correct.
Anyway, the point being that he was sending a message to Adolf Hitler because Hitler was saying, look, you know, if we just sign a peace treaty with us, we won't invade. And he basically, in this speech, which is 4.5 minutes of the most amazing speech, I think, given within the last 500 years, the we will never surrender speech, I listened to that and I watched it. And I'll tell you, Joseph, I almost got emotional about it because that, first of all, that very seldom ever happens to me. But at the same time, the thing that when I watched it, my heart broke because here we have a man who led a country into a war that they had no idea what the outcome was going to be. And he was bound and determined to make sure that that country came out on top, or at least was in a position to defend itself with dignity. And he certainly did that in style. So I watched it, and at the same time while I'm watching it, I'm thinking, where are today's Winston Churchills? Where are today's leaders? You know, the people who can get us through these difficult times. I'm not comparing anybody to Winston Churchill or Adolf Hitler or anything like that. I'm just saying that to hear that kind of oration, to hear that kind of determination, that yes, this is difficult, but we're going to get through it. We're going to, we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have a plan, and this is what that plan looks like, and here's how we're going to do it. And none of this nonsense about, well, we'll just try this and it works great. If it doesn't, well, we'll try something else, which is what we're getting now. And when Canadians go to the polls, often the attitude is, well, I'll just vote for the same old guy because nobody inspires me. Well, that's a hell of a thing to say. Even though you're right, I understand why that would be true. But holy cow, are we that far removed from what was, statesmanship 80 years ago? Have we fallen that far? The closest I can get to somebody who was like Winston Churchill would be Ronald Reagan, who had a way of inspiring people and bringing them together instead of concentrating on their differences and dividing them for political gain. And that's the kind of politics that we have today. People out there who are doing things simply because it makes their chances of holding on to their government pensions and perks and salaries and all that stuff for one more kick at the can.
Well, Nick, I'm just trying to think of an adequate response. It's disheartening, and my personal experience in this, looking for viable, inspiring political leadership for the people who believe in what they say, who are going to hold themselves accountable, with the people with the integrity. It's very disheartening, Nick. Nobody immediately comes to mind when I'm trying to think of who fits the bill, who has the character to be able to lead, and to lead in a fashion that I think is what real leadership is all about. Again, we've just come out of the Christmas season, and what is the defining trend, the defining characteristic, other than the traditional stuff and the real meaning of Christmas and all of that stuff? When we look back on the Christmas season of 2020, what is it that we're going to recall in terms of the character, the defining moments of this Christmas season? And, it's not going to be, for me anyway, it's not going to be that they had ordered for the day after Christmas, Boxing Day in Ontario, a new series of lockdowns, store shuttings and stuff like that. And it's not going to be, if you happen to be in Quebec, the fact that that the government had imposed its curfew. No, for me, and I think for a lot of other people out there, the defining character of this past season is going to be the plethora, the huge number of politicians who decided that they were going to go away on vacation out of the country, out to different parts of this country, wherever. They decided that they were going to go on vacation with their families during the Christmas season. Now, in principle, I don't have a problem with that. And as a practical matter, I don't even have a problem with it in the current pandemic environment. But what I really have a problem with is that these are our leaders who are saying to the population, we're in the midst of an emergency, or we're on the verge of an emergency, a crisis, and the only way that we can react to this crisis is to make this sacrifice. And the sacrifice this year is that you should all stay home. Nobody should go away. Stay home. Celebrate the Christmas season with your family who live with you already. Don't travel. Don't hold Christmas dinners. Don't hold a New Year's celebration. Everybody just stay home. Now, they didn't pass a law about this, which they've done now. Nobody was forcing, there was no forcing anybody to do it. But then, after telling people to do this, how many of those very same so-called leaders then went off and did precisely the opposite of what they were telling people that they had to do? And to me, that is such a violation of the trust that ought to exist between the leader and the people he or she is leading. You have to lead by example. You cannot, if you're in the army, okay, and you're saying, we have a rule. Our rule is that in this regiment, everybody shaves every morning. Okay? That's the rule. And
Yep.
Nick, when you're in the field, as I'm sure you know, it's not so easy for everybody to shave every morning. Okay? Where do
Sometimes the things that get in the way. Yep.
You've got things you got to do. You may be just coming off of guard duty. You may be like lots of things. The truth is, when we were in the Navy, okay, that kind of thing, morning ablutions and stuff like that was so much easier and so much more luxurious than our brothers who were, grunts, the infantry and that, who have to figure out how to do this with cold water, from the local stream or something like that, or whatever happens to be in your jerry cans if you're bivouacking. You know what I'm saying? But they do it. And you know why they do it? Can you imagine a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain or any rank, somebody with rank, going to their men, or their, I guess you say men and women now, right? Well, you wouldn't say this to women, but you say, in this unit, we shave every morning. And then they don't shave. But they insist on everybody else shaving. Now, what I've just described may seem such a minor thing, but that is such an egregious violation of principles of command and leadership. Like if something like that happened if I had a subordinate officer who ever dared to do that, to say to his or her unit, their subordinates,